I hit the button,
And
so
we're live.
now the internet can see us.
Hello, Internet.
Hello.
Hey, Internet.
There's definitely no one watching right now.
Hooray.
There. I think my
Overjoyed.
mom's gonna be watching this, so that's nice.
Ooh.
But
Tell her
yeah.
tell her to hit me up.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's all about just getting them subs, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, mommy. Mwah.
No offense to you lovely people, but I'm just keeping my screen up on Rad's beautiful face.
Oh, same. Is that not what we're all doing?
We can all just take a minute to thank our parents for watching us this evening.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even think my mom's watching.
I really hope my mom's not watching.
I really hope. I'll be getting
Considering
Facebook
they're in the same house as me right now, I hope not.
Well, they can hear you.
Yeah.
I don't know if my mom knows about as much about this channel or the fact that my avatar is a goat furry, which we'll see how she feels about that.
Well, you make it sound so unwholesome. It's a devil.
Oh, you're right. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
The devil's
Yeah.
the original furry.
That's
It says so in the Bible. Right there in the Bible. I'm from South Carolina, so I know.
yeah. And then Lucifer yiffed at Eve.
It's my favorite verse.
Yeah, he took from the tree.
We are
of Yiffin.
live, right?
Yeah, oh, we're live.
Oh, yeah,
this is all being broadcast.
Good.
All of our
So-
channels just crash. Just
Yeah,
the end of
I
our
totally
little
just lost
careers
like
here.
5,000 subs.
Oh yeah,
I'm at 900 again.
Oh, you didn't know this was a biblical fanfic about Satan and
Conquest
Adam
of
and Eve.
Very
the
Bible
biblical
slash
fanfic.
So we
We're
didn't
shipping-
read the Bible this month. That wasn't our book. We read The Conquest of Bread by P.D. Potts, and yeah, Sonia's
Bread
cleaning
Dan.
up. She's not making
Yeah,
any
right.
noise, so you won't see her. But
Mhm.
let's there we go. Let's go around the table, so to speak, and introduce ourselves and give our pronouns and all that good stuff. I'm Thought Slime. You can call me Thought Slime or Casey. He, him, please. YouTube.com/Thought Slime. You're already there. So
Who's next? Me?
we should decide that by consensus according to the book we read. So
yes.
Is it okay if I go next?
no.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
Okay. I'm Sonia, aka An Actual Joke, youtube.com/An Actual Joke. Many of you who are fans of mine will know that my voice is in a nebulous spot right now. But either way, just check out my channel, youtube.com/An Actual Joke. My pronouns are she, her. I'm gonna plug my Twitter also, twitter.com/An Actual Joke, because I am shameless.
Should I go? Is that does the I'm Black Goat 666 because I'm an edgy teen. I'm very new to this, so apologies. But yeah, I make you can also call me Sam. He him pronouns. YouTube channel is youtube.com/blackgoat666. And I think that's it's, I don't know what else do I do here.
No, that's good.
Okay,
That's good.
cool.
I was just gonna let you hang in the wind there.
Okay, cool, perfect, good.
I'm a radical reviewer. Rad Rev, some people have said. I like long walks on the beach. Oh wait, no, that's not it. My YouTube channel is Radical Reviewer. I review books mostly, but I do dabble in other things here and there. And that's me.
Could you look at us when you're talking to us, please?
Little camera shy, I think.
No, fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm not complaining about what I'm seeing, so I guess I'll take it away.
Yeah.
Torch. Okay. I'm American Johnson. I'm gonna plug my Mastodon because nobody uses it yet. But you can find me on Twitter or Mastodon at American Johnson. You can find me on Facebook and YouTube at Non-Compete. That's my channel name. That's me. That's who I am. Oh, he and him are my pronouns.
Nice.
And I'm very sleep deprived, so I'm probably going to be a hot mess here today. So.
Mhm. All right.
Hello, internet.
So the bread book. Is this? I'm curious. Is this anybody's first time reading the bread book?
I mean, I would say it's my first time if I hadn't I got halfway through it, but this is my first time doing this, or reading this, yeah.
So your first time reading the second half of the book?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's my first time reading any of the book.
So you I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Oh,
You
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
finish it.
No, I'm sorry. I'm
No worries.
a bad comrade here, but yeah.
No, it's okay. You can stick around for half of the stream, and
yeah, that is also something I should have said in my introduction. I am a class traitor, so by not reading these books. But yeah, no, this is my first time. I've also, I think I've said to you thoughts on that, like I'm probably like the most like closest to liberal of probably any of you folks here. So it's yeah, this is a cool, yeah, sort of, oh, okay, yeah, I can put some more I can make this make a bit more sense to me now.
well, that's good actually, because I wouldn't want it to just be full of people that would automatically agree. You know, it's good to have a different perspective.
Sweet.
I'm on the other end of the spectrum, I'd say, because the Conquest of Bread is probably my go-to #1 text, and it's basically what, pretty much radicalized me from being a liberal to the left. So I'm a huge fan of the book, and I feel like Kropotkin speaks to me directly into my soul, my heart, my anarcho-communist heart. Bleeds
I read this book.
bread.
I read this book 3 times. This is the 3rd time. I read this book once when I was 13, getting into anarchism. Didn't really understand it. Read this book 2nd time I was 14, and I finally started to understand it. And after I entered the working world, now I fucking get it.
I know.
So
yeah.
that's something I wanted to talk about actually. In terms of the book as an introduction, because I was struck reading it that I actually felt it was not a very good introduction. It felt like it was very insular and full of like lots of little debates that leftists might have with each other, but it's always recommended as this like intro to anarchist communism, and I find that a little, especially on a reread, I found that a little strange. What do you guys think of that?
I think it's
I'd
like,
say guys, I mean people, comrades.
I think it's like a bit higher in like the theory ranks than entry level. Like it's not exactly entry level, but if you can understand it, like if you come in able to understand it, you're gonna do fine. But I'd say it's maybe the first few chapters are great for entering it. But after like the first few chapters, it gets into like a lot of internal leftist debates, like labor vouchers and how these things work, and scientific socialism, and all these different things that this book is arguing over. And like, there's a lot to think about, but there's a lot to think about for people who are new, but there's also a lot to talk about for people who know the whole context of the book.
It's thorough. I think that's its strength and its weakness is it goes into a lot of detail. I do think that for an almost 19th century book, it's pretty readable. I don't feel like it's too prosy or whatever you'd say, but I know that it definitely goes into a lot of detail, and that might be really overwhelming to somebody who's like really just starting. And I was going to ask all of you. I mean, the only problem with that is that I don't know of any kind of. I wish there were like a simpler version or like a brochure version of it. And I haven't ever seen anything like that. That's actually kind of honestly what prompted me to build my channel and my blog, is because I wanted to make a more approachable and kind of, I guess, modern version of it.
I think that's what kind of like inspired a lot of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not necessarily just this text, but
for me,
all
it
these-
was this text was really my number one inspiration. So
Yeah, I mean, I like I kind of found the opening stuff to be, I don't know, I think probably going off of how like we're all saying that how this sort of stuff we're trying to like sort of make more approachable content along these lines. I mean, for me, I like really got like introduced to this stuff and sort of I guess radicalized when I was like in school sort of studying these types of things, I guess. I studied like English sociology, and then sort of moved into really liking critical theory because that was sort of me being like, oh, I can put these two things together. We were virtue signaling with our book, with the books we like. This was sort of like my big The Political Unconscious by Frederick Jameson, where it sort of put art in the sociological and historical context under which it was produced. And to me, what I kind of liked about this book, like the beginning stuff, I've always been really put off by Marx, especially by how sort of flowery and I always found it kind of dogmatic his writing is. Whereas when this book really like, I mean, I haven't read Capital, so I mean, you know, fair enough. But with this book, what I really liked is how into the weeds it got and how it actually started to be like, okay, let's actually let's move past sort of moral issues and like moral principles and move into actual sort of material or practical concerns and how those could be dealt with.
Yeah,
like there's a little bit of that in Capital, but like Capital's mostly talking about economic theory and how capital even accumulates and how it forms and how it functions, pretty much. And then the Bread book talks about like, okay, but like let's be real. Let's talk about needs. Like what do we need to what do we need to address? Like what's the like and then just going back for a second to what really made people want to talk about like their beliefs. Not necessarily as I don't agree with this much as like completely now as I used to back when I started, but The Ecology of Freedom by Murray Bookchin is quintessentially what radicalized me hardline to like the point where I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to talk about this. I need to put my skills out there to actually, you know, talk about this stuff and like Bookchin's works in general, because like especially social anarchism or lifestyle anarchism, but essentially, but then going back to the Bread book, the fact that it addresses needs first instead of the theoretical is what I find one of the most important things about it.
yes.
Sure.
Yeah. And you know that's probably why it's titled that.
Yeah.
I think that like if we're looking at it as a summary, basically chapter 1 to 7 is like the summary portion of it where it explains everything is made by everyone, so you can't really subdivide that, and then focusing on how do we distribute food, clothes, and shelter. And then after chapter 7, it starts getting into like, you know, the ways and means and agreeable work and the more disputable, you know, leftist argument point stuff.
It's kind of like where did you stop reading Black Goat?
I got basically through like I read like fully up through the chapter on food and then just sort of skimmed around and then like read stuff online that was sort of summarizing stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say you got like the gist. There's some specific arguments in the back half that are I mean, if you happen to get into an argument with somebody about the utility of labor vouchers, I'm sure it'll be really handy to have read, but
right.
I think that in
labor
his
vouchers
time,
are
though,
really
these
just the same
debates
as-
were a lot more.
Yes.
Like, if you look in the context of the time, the debates were a lot more alive, I think, and active. Honestly, it just sort of makes me sad because it makes me realize that you know, the degree that leftism has sort of fallen out of popularity because these debates aren't really happening that much anymore.
Well, I think that happened. There's another book that like addresses like why this like the intellectual debate has like the public debate has like dropped drastically from what it was, and that's Amusing Ourselves to Death. the book by Neil Postman.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't completely finished it, but it talks a good way to summarize it is if you go to a series by the MOA, which is called The Art of the Heel. There's a part in there that talks about how Amusing Ourselves to Death addresses the issue of how public discourse changed in the era of television and how it changed for what Postman argues is for the worst. But Postman also is pretty liberal, so it doesn't really have much of a solution.
Mm.
But
Classic liberal.
Yeah, right.
or at least from what I've read so far. But essentially, the idea of the Amusing Ourselves to Death is, TV has, for the detriment of society, lowered the discourse because of the way TV is produced. It's to entertain first and teach second, if it does.
And just the way that, or sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, now we're in the YouTube era, so it's gonna be interesting to see how.
Well, I don't think there's been any detrimental political effect from YouTube.
Of course not. Because I was gonna say, the thing. I think this was there's some poet. I think it was I always mix up Blake and Yeats, but for one, you just sort of looking at like the mode of production under which art was produced. Like with TV, you get so much heavier an influence of capital because there's so much more going on beyond it, and then you sort of see with like YouTube, it is interesting because theoretically that the removal of that capital would make it way more tenable for like leftism, and in some ways it has, but it kind of remind me of I don't know if anyone read Kill All Normies. It's I do have I think her name's Angela Nagel is the
Angela Nagel.
Yeah, I do have like some issues where she is like quite liberal, but something that she sort of gets into, and in the introduction for my copy, it sort of talks a lot about like the Occupy movement as sort of this enactment of anarcho communism, and something that I think that she nails really well is how she sort of charts how the alt-right really does satisfy all the requirements of like a horizontal sort of structure that the Occupy movement was calling for. And it's sort of interesting seeing this. Well, I mean, obviously YouTube is like such a big sort of hub or part of that. And yeah, it's sort of interesting seeing that. Or thinking
my issue with that book, its research is shoddy, and she doesn't understand the alt-right well enough that they appear horizontal only to attract the people, and then once you're subsumed, you submit to the hierarchy.
That's very fair, yeah.
It's a lot. It's sort of a cult model, the cult model of indoctrination and submission,
but without the like orgies.
Yeah, none of the time.
I think back to the topic of non-compete, you were talking about like these labor discussions aren't really at the height they were in, say, the radical labor era, and Rise and Repression of Radical Labor is a good book on that subject. But I mean, 20 years ago, how many of us lefty YouTubers would like get a bunch of people to put together like a local cable access show or something? Would be like the equivalent of having a YouTube channel 20 years ago.
Well, I was definitely basically radicalized by memes, and I'm only like half joking because
same. I'm so glad someone else.
Social media is definitely what brought me to this table, and
weird.
I was radicalized by libertarian socialist rants, who used to be one of those. He used to be one of those like ranting channels that was like anti-feminist and liberal, and then he became an anarchist, and it was like. And then I was still subscribed to him at the time, and it popped in my feed, and it was like, what?
That's so interesting.
Because I was just as I was becoming like a leftist, and I had thought Marxist-Leninism was the only leftism there was.
How long ago was that? Like when did that person make the switch?
4 or 5 years ago.
Oh wow. So okay, so he's actually I actually just sort of. I became a liberal about 4 or 5 years ago, and then I just became an actual leftist probably about a year or two ago. So I wish I was following that channel.
you had the most like gradation in your political development. Like you went. Most people go from straight to like libertarian to leftist. But you kind of went in between. For a little while.
It was a slide, and I was kind of like kicking and screaming the whole time, honestly. And a lot of it was internal, like an internal struggle, because I sort of started to see the cracks in capitalism several years ago, but I kind of just didn't want to admit it to myself. And then, and that's kind of why going back to the book, the Bread book is so important to me, because reading that book, I think that its thoroughness was what pulled me over, because it just dismantled every argument I was clinging to one by one. You know, as I went through the book, it was just literally checking off the list of things that were holding me back. So that's why I kind of like the fact that it's so deep. But it's a terrible, I guess, like beginner's guide to leftism. I think
it has that scientific scrutiny to it.
I think a better beginner's guide might be like ABCs of Anarchism, or What is Communist Anarchism?
Or those two I really like, and also Anarchy Works by Peter Gelderloos.
Ooh, I've been wanting to read some Gelderloos.
After the intro, another good thing to read in the early stages is Are We Good Enough? Are We Good Enough is like this big Are We Good Enough is this essay that I think is really important for beginners, because it's just like,
also written by Kropotkin. We should mention.
It's also written by Kropotkin.
Oh, really? I missed that one,
because it really just like talks about like who can why like the question, are we good enough for anarchist communism? And it's like
and another good one is The State and Its Historic Role, which talks a lot about kind of pre-state communism, but not in the sense of I forget the term, but like the idea that ancient peoples were all communist. But this is more so like in the medieval period, after the fall of Rome, but before the rise of the nation state. The communes in Europe.
Oh, that's cool. It seems like you guys, like you folks, really sort of got into this like very, very differently than I did, which is interesting. For me, I was like very like liberal, read Vox, and would be like, that's my like data driven nuance, both sides, whatever stuff. And then like you were saying, like memes were a big thing. Weird Facebook groups were a huge thing. RIP post aesthetics. I don't know if that was one for you, but and like from there, that plus my education sort of culminated in this way where it was like, oh yeah, Marxism sort of, or the flaws in capitalism seem sort of unavoidable, or can't not be addressed in a way that like, that need to make sense. And what was really cool about reading this book was because like generally I don't really know how to describe myself politically. I generally say like I'm if we're doing like political compass style stuff, I'd be like farthest left and then fluctuating pretty wildly between mid-authoritarian to mid-libertarian, because like I generally like my things tend to be like around like I believe in gun control but also disarm the cops, like in that sort of do both sort of things. And what was really cool about reading this was it sort of seemed to make a lot of those contradictions sort of go away in a way that I really liked, and that really made sense to me. So yeah, this was really cool reading this. I mean, trying to read this, but yeah.
I think that like having crappy dead end jobs, or maybe some sort of volunteer work or some kind of work, like really makes the book make a lot more sense with its critique of who's actually doing the work around here.
I think Sonia can speak to that. She was.
I read it at 14, and then I read it now after like working in freelancing and jobs for like the past 3 years. It's completely different on how you understand the book. Like in the abstract, it's like, yes, this is terrible, but that's only from like the experience of of someone who's never had to like really do that. And then working freelancing, especially freelancing, oh god, you get just shit on so much by the way that working operates, that the book just like clicks.
And I come to that from the opposite spectrum as well, because my background, I was actually a capitalist for over a decade. I ran several businesses and had like 10 or 15 employees at my height of my evil reign. And so for me, it was sort of the opposite. It was sort of looking back, because when I was running my companies, I thought that I was just like the benevolent ruler. And I felt like I had this right to kind of steer that ship, like I was the captain. And, it kind of made me look back on those days and realize what a dick I was and how I was. And I was a shitty capitalist. So I was like failing at stealing the labor value of my employees, so it was just like, I realized I was just I was playing this horrible game, and, compassion doesn't work with capitalism. Those two concepts don't mix. And it just made me realize a lot of the reasons why my businesses weren't ever as successful as I, thought they would be. And it also made me realize how I was exploiting people. And that was sort of a hard pill to swallow for me. And now I'm freelancing, so I'm getting that super shit into the stick, just like everyone else. So,
I think that Michael Albert has a good analogy for the mindset of like a owner or a boss. It's not someone like wringing their hands maniacally, oh, I'm going to get all these profits and totally screw over my workers, but it's more paternalistic. And the example that he gives is like, if you had a child, would you give that child $100 a month allowance? You'd say no, that they wouldn't know what to do with it. They would feel buyer's remorse. They would feel guilty. They'd be overwhelmed. So I'm actually doing them a favor by, I'm just paying them just the right amount and really helping them build up their small sum or whatever.
And actually, Kropotkin, I think, is for the most part really fair to capitalists and doesn't really present capitalists as sort of a like maniacal enemy. I think that Kropotkin is pretty, like, he demonstrates some understanding of, what the capitalists are not necessarily inherently bad people. And he talks about, especially when he talks, I think it's in the chapter about clothing and the chapter about housing, where he just says, we're not going to like burn these people at the stake. We're just going to make things fair. And he says, when we dismiss their servants, they're not going to want these huge houses anymore. They're going to want to move into some place that's smaller and easier to manage. And, it'll be better for everybody. There's one point where he cuts, I love this line where he does insult capitalists. He says something like we're not going to take, we're talking about personal property. And it's like, we're not going to take the coats off the shoulders of the fat bourgeoisie.
Like no one wants a used coat.
The line in that passage that really stuck out to me was when he was talking about the role of capitalists post-revolution, and he said that it would be good to have people on hand who are used to luxury, and the example that he gave was some plutocrat working in a sewer, and they said he'll know what's wrong and he'll like want to fix it because he won't be willing to work in an unhygienic sewer. I thought that was such a good point.
It's a good point. It is. And I've actually, I've been there because in my fall from grace as a capitalist, I did have to do some plumbing work, and it made me realize like this is not a good situation for workers to be in. We need to have better.
Radiant Tupai in the chat says Kropotkin has an upper class background. I think that's putting it lightly. He was a prince that gave away his title.
Right.
But yeah.
Speaking of the book addressing like wealthy people working, it talks a lot about idlers and the lazy people and stuff.
I love that.
They address it. I like the way it's addressed, that if we're making this much better system, better than the way things are now, everything's shared better, the work is more enjoyable, people are going to somehow be more lazy than they already are in this terrible system.
Well, he's very pragmatic about pretty much any of the like really common arguments you would hear against, well, anarchism could never work, because I think in that same part about the laziness, he talks about how, look, it's not rocket science. If somebody's at your work and they just refuse to work, then eventually you just tell them go away. And that's basically his solution to that. And it's like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's exactly how, because I think a good way to think about how anarchism might work is if you've ever had any experience with like a volunteer organization, and it's like the people who aren't, if it's a really well-functioning organization with good people that are kind of involved, then the people who aren't pulling their own weight just kind of fall away over time. And that's, or they get inspired and pull their weight with everybody else. I mean,
and who has a better understanding of what kind of work you're putting in, your boss that's hardly there or the people who are actually working with you?
That's another thing that I really liked on a reread was talking about how the synergistic effect of having the removal of the oh fuck, I'm sorry, the division of labor. When he talked about how in its absence, the person who's designing a plowing machine would have a better understanding of how to build it because he's actually worked the soil. And I thought that was really interesting because it kind of completely, I think, tears apart the idea of the division of labor and its ability to innovate.
And from what I understand, he actually toured around a lot. I mean, he was a scientist, so he tried to approach these subjects with a scientist's mind. I mean, obviously, some of the stuff is out of date, but he would go around and tour with, a lot of different organizations, and he went and looked at different train systems. So he was pretty methodical about where he was getting these ideas from, I think, and he documents a lot of that in the book as well, which kind of makes it dry to some. That's always like the you have to balance between giving too many facts and details and making it boring to read, and then not giving enough, and then having people try to pick it apart. So, but I think he balances it pretty well. I think for somebody who's writing in almost the 19th century, I think it reads a lot like kind of a more modern, fact-based a book, in my opinion.
It's like an anarchist episode of How It's Made.
But going back to the division of labor thing, the way, like he says, like the plow is better designed by the person who's worked the field. It's like the difference. The reason there's the difference between the design for profit and the design for need, which is the design for need would obviously become best from the person working the field, but the design for profit is best when it's kind of functioning, but you'll need a new one that's better later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even then. But even then, if you had someone designing the machine and they had never worked in the field, they could design a perfect machine, but it might not be what the person working the field needs.
Yeah, it's not perfect for the job that is for the job. Like they made a machine that works perfectly for the job they imagine, not the job that actually exists. And And
if you go on a job site where people were working really hard, like if you've ever been on a construction site or something, especially, where people are carrying stuff around all day, it's going back to Kropotkin's idea that it's kind of common sense. I mean, people don't carry things that they don't need. They always have if you talk to somebody who's been doing a job for 15 or 20 years and you look at the tools they're using, I mean that people tend to strip down the things that they work with over time. And it's just, to me, it's like,
especially strippers.
I think if anyone's ever worked retail, this comes up a lot in retail that coming down from corporate, you have to say these things, hand out these things, do these certain things, and that takes up the whole workday. And that's not the most effective way to do it. So you pretend to do the things you're asked to so that the boss is satisfied, and then you actually go about doing it the most efficient way.
Right.
Yeah, I worked as a cell phone kiosk in a Target when Target briefly came to Canada.
Sick.
And their idea that came down from on high was every single person that was approaching the kiosk, you had to walk up to them and say, "Hi, welcome to Target Mobile. How can I help you?" And can you think of anything more off-putting than you're in a Target and you're walking past the cell phone display and you have to go and you're looking at the cell phone, just, I might need a new iPhone, and someone walks up to you and says, "Hi, welcome to Target Mobile." It's so fucking creepy.
I had to do that same thing at Circuit City back in 2002. So,
cuts.
and I never did it.
Yeah,
never
I
did
mean,
it.
yeah.
Oh, they would have spies.
Oh
is
yeah,
the
yeah.
thing. They would have mystery
yeah.
shoppers like all the time.
That's
It
fucked.
doesn't work, and that's the
No.
funny thing about management. I mean, that's it does, and I think a lot of the people, I mean, especially the people that I talk to, especially in the circles that I come from, actually, sort of my privileged background. I mean, I know a lot of people that have never really worked in their life, including, you could say myself to some extent. I mean, a lot of us who come from these privileged backgrounds, we've never really worked a job where you have to sweat or you have to really, be miserable all day. And a lot of people think that their little office mid-management job, and I'm not disparaging anybody, there's all kinds of different ways of oppression, but a lot of people who've never really suffered at work probably are not as able to, I guess, empathize with these kinds of situations.
This is a bit, I mean, I work in restaurants like basically every job I've had. And like I worked at this members only yacht club one time that was so firmly cemented my belief that if you've never worked a bad job, there's only so good of a human being that you can be. like literally, like this one woman ordered a thing that she was ordering like a salad or something. She asked for like something on the side and then literally just turned to her friends to go, yeah, it's good to do that just to keep the cooks on their toes. Like she literally had it on the side so that she could put it onto her salad just to like make the help dance. I mean, like I'm based out of Ontario. We just put in a 14 an hour minimum wage, which is very overdue, but also for the small business I work at.
And it ain't going up for another 4 years, so I hope you can make do on it.
Yeah, no, that's gonna be rough. Once it went up, the people who like run the restaurant I work at, specifically the guy who's the accountant, who is just unabashedly like the worst person. Have you ever had that? Like, my thing with shitty jobs is that you'll sort of like, do you ever have that where you like imagine someone doing something so shitty to you that you're like justified in going off on them? Like,
oh yes, yeah.
So much of my day is just imagining the accountant at my job threatening my family, so I can like
do the Liam Neeson phone call.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, they like as soon as the minimum wage went up, and like I mean, this is I tend to be on the side of like honestly being against minimum wages instead of just being there should be a maximum wage where you're only allowed to take a certain percentage of the profits. I mean, we just read Kropotkin. I mean, no wages, period. But I mean, like it's brutal the level of like how little they know about how the business is working, where they raised the prices of all the products so much that like customers were furious, and we just had to be like, you're going to go out of business in like a few months if you don't change this. I mean, it's been hard all over, though. I should say my boss has only been able to take 3 vacations since the start of 2018, so it's really hard for everybody. Harrowing, but totally can see that disconnect and the extent. Like, this is my like easiest pitch to people who are like whatever against like this type of like leftist stuff, is being like, businesses would make so much more sense to be cooperatively owned, to be because maybe let's buy into what you're saying, and that the person who runs the business knows the most about how to like do the advertising or the accounting or whatever. They can have that job if they actually are the best at it. They don't know shit about, like, I use like a kitchen example, they don't know shit about cooking, so they like, why should they have control over that aspect of it? And I mean, I think it's a really,
and on the other end of that argument is what kind of argument could there possibly be for not having workplace democracy? I mean, people who tend to be against things like socialism, they wrap themselves up in their, yellow snake flag and talk about how much they love liberty. But I just don't. I understand it because I used to be that person, but I don't even know why it took me so long to understand that these workplace dictatorships are just as oppressive as a state can be. You know, like there's really like why are we so willing to sacrifice democracy and sacrifice liberty when it comes to the thing that we do for 8 hours or more every day of our lives?
Mm.
That's something that it took me. I don't know. When I look back, it's like I was in a fugue state for decades, and I can't understand why it took me so long to wrap my head around the fact that capitalism is just as oppressive as any state.
In the book, he talks about this factory where not only is it it's managed very well, but so many of the little things, like the machines don't make as much noise, and it's the idea that the machines only made noise before because nobody gave a shit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually worse for the machines if they're making that noise. That means there's something wrong, but it's not profitable to fix it, so they just let it happen. And it was like fucking up people's hearing for no reason. And that's the type of thing that it's just inevitable in capitalism.
Mm-hmm. I mean, something like I've
Someone
that's weird. Here, give me 1 second. Go ahead. I'm gonna put. I think it might be feedback from the speaker. I'm gonna put my headphones in and then do the rest like you cool guys have been.
Look at that dog.
I apologize. I apologize to the chat. I'm too wrapped up in the conversation to keep up with it.
I'm like occasionally glancing at it and I'm like, I don't know if I can insert this anywhere, and it's just like,
oh yeah, no, I was disappointed because I thought the on the side of this hangout was the chat for the video, but it's not. It's the chat for the hangout, which is useless.
True.
well,
I'm
that's
already-
like if we want to say something and we don't want.
Chat for the hangout, which is
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. I think I fixed my audio stuff. I was gonna say basically just like other just easy. I basically I'm the liberal who argues with libertarians is basically where I would put myself as but like you can pay someone enough. You can pay someone as little as you possibly can, or you can pay someone enough that they give a shit, and you can't do both. And yeah, like with like the machines or something like that, it's why would you give a shit if like when you become sort of aware of that stuff and you're like, oh, it's better for me if the restaurant I work at is dead all day because less of my labor just got stolen from me. Like when you
You ever walked into it happens to me all the time. I see it happen when you walk into like a gas station or a convenience store and there's like nobody in the store and there's just the one person behind the counter and their face, they just get visibly miserable because you walked in and they have to deal with a customer. And I just always, I always have so much, because I've been in that kind of situation and I'm just like, yeah, it's like, how can anybody think that the best way to run a business is to just kind of chain people to them and give them the bare minimum? I mean, and why is that the way we want to run our society? It's just, it boggles my mind now. Fascinating, depressing.
I've like
keeping it light here on the validation gang.
just like just like a personal note. I've had a lot of personal like sensory issues. I've gotten so desperate for a job. I sent in job apps again, a ton of restaurants to be a dishwasher. I have so much sensory issues. That's how desperate I am for a job right now. And it's just like there's that factor, and now I want to talk about how Kropotkin talks about how there's like this is talked about by most socialists, but the need for unemployment is another topic that Kropotkin discusses, and it's just like, and the need for unemployment being so useless for when we're talking about like a society that could actually like with the ability could have like everyone who wants to working and supplying all the needs for everyone. And it just boggles my mind to be in the situation of like unemployment again. And it's just like, what, why? And then I read this book and I say even louder, why?
Yeah. It's, Oh, go ahead.
Off of that, at one of my jobs, my boss and I have talked a lot about a sort of post having a job with customer service society where people are just ordering stuff more and there's kiosks more and now the drones that deliver things. We have a society where people need to work 40 plus hours to make ends meet, and yet you look out there and entry level jobs are just disappearing.
Oh yeah. And it's going to be that's the thing, and I kind of haven't really talked about this as much as I want to, but it's something I've been thinking about lately, is the time lock we have on these social issues that we're having. Because if you think about the fact that we have automation is just going to become out of control over the next few years. I mean, driving is the #1 job in America right now, and those jobs are all going to be gone as soon as Tesla and Uber figure out their self-driving cars.
I mean, even with self-driving cars, that's not even just every driving job. That's every job that's moving one thing to another place. That's every factory, or that's so many warehouse jobs. That's everything.
And I live in Vietnam, where the #1 job in most developing countries, textiles, it's the one thing you can't automate yet. But they just made the Sewbot, which is a robot that can sew. And so now those textile jobs are going to disappear. So that's going to dry up the jobs in developing countries. Exactly. It's the most adorable apocalypse ever. And we're just, and they're already starting to float the liberal solution to this. The centrist solution is, of course, the universal basic income, which will just devolve into feudalism. So we have a time lock. We have a deadline to sort this stuff out before things just get cemented in and every semblance of social mobility we have just disappears. So,
and then we're in Fukuyama's end of history, but the nightmare version.
That's something that kind of leapt out at me at the book. Is the book has this really optimistic view of automation and technology, because he coming from the perspective of the revolution's just around the corner, and when it is, all of these technologies are going to be leveraged for human good. And where we are now and seeing what actually happened is kind of glum. Yeah.
Because I wrote a blog post about this. When they make a machine that can sew for us, that's a terrible job. Okay. I have a really good friend, and her mother is a tailor in one of these factories. And, when we make a machine that can get rid of a terrible, dirty, dangerous job like that, we should all be celebrating and rejoicing. But capitalism makes us get into this mindset where it's oh no, the jobs are going to disappear. It's that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We should want to get rid of these jobs. We should want to be having more free time. But the capitalism does not allow that to happen, and it's infuriating.
That was my biggest closest to either anarchism or real leftism was Robert Anton Wilson. I don't know how many of you were the smart asshole in high school, but I
was definitely an asshole.
Oh yeah. that was my big thing that I got really into, and he did a very not coherent model of what anarchism would look like, where essentially it would be every town has its own different idea of what its government is, and it didn't really make any sense. But that was one of the big things that he really touched on, and I think a kind of interesting, cool way was around doing automation, or he was at least the wake-up call to me about how it's fucked up that we think of automation as this negative thing, because it it should be, this is liberating, but rather than that, it's one person who probably won't even see the fruits of the reward, that would already be pretty unjust. But rather than even just the person who invented a machine that can do all the sewing, it's the person who owns the rights to that. And yeah.
And then Carl in the comments I just saw brought up the idea of climate change and environmental destruction, and that contributes to the idea that we have a limited amount of time to solve these problems as well. I mean, and that's, Kropotkin talked a little bit. He didn't, I don't think environmentalism was quite as advanced of a concept in his time, but he did mention that, having workers in control of the means of production would create, more cleaner factories and cleaner sewers, as we talked about. So, people capitalism is designed to make profit, whereas I think what Kropotkin is arguing is that we should be designing a world that humans would want to live in. You know, and I think that that's like the really big disconnect between capitalism and these more leftist anarchist ideas.
I think that's something that dates this book and other texts of the same era. It's very idealizes production. It talks about draining the marshes and improving the mines, and I think something like that just wouldn't really fly as a leftist text in our current understanding of ecology and stuff.
Might I recommend The Ecology of Freedom?
Yeah. But that was all I could think of whenever he talked about like taming the land or things like that. It's just like Murray Bookchin is rolling in his grave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's dated. His futurism is a little dated too. I mean, he talked about how we would be using electric lights to grow plants, and that's just such a terrible idea now. But we realize that.
I mean, we do that.
Sure.
Like
do
for the black market, but we do that.
Yeah. We only do that for a certain type of grass.
Ow! Do you folks remember? I was looking this up again, and I guess they're like 10 years old, but those Zeitgeist documentaries of old YouTube.
Oh yeah. I've been looking at those.
Greenhouses in every city. The perfectly scientifically devised society.
I'm not.
Yeah.
With this.
That's all just. Yeah,
there was a commenter in when I first started uploading videos that would always ask me to watch Zeitgeist, and at the time I was like, I wanted to be really polite to everybody, and I was like, oh, you know, I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's for me. But now that I'm completely ungrateful for the people that helped me get here, I can say that Zeitgeist is trash, and it's the first Zeitgeist documentary was about the government faking 9/11, and it's horseshit. And
it's also about Jesus wasn't real, which like sure, but all the stuff they say is like so dumb and wrong.
And also Jesus was like definitely real. Like
I mean, obviously,
he probably wasn't like God, but he was a real person.
And now we're back to the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, my church group is watching this, so yeah.
Well, we're just funning.
The dog is your church group.
No, we're all going to heaven, so mwah, 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 mwah.
I am totally the most religious.
Hey, so we talked about like a critique is like the idyllic view of production, but I also feel like another way that Kropotkin idealizes in the text is about work. He says that you know, oh look, these people will go out and save people on a sinking ship without giving a care or a worry, and they save them, which is true in like a big crisis situation, but not true when it comes to the day-to-day. One thing that I wrote in my notes is like the tsunami in Haiti, that like when the tsunami hit, people wanted to help in the situation, but I mean, things are already bad in the third world before the tsunami, and nothing was done because it just wasn't, I guess, glamorous enough or in the news enough to really help.
Well, that's a fair criticism. I'd also say that we're also taught not to care about the third world because the way that the first world education is structured, we're just the way it's structured is through the Prussian military style system that we're supposed to just not give a shit about them because like, oh, they're just backwards, and not because of the reason that we made them poor and unable to industrialize and unable to
I mean, and like also like I don't think you're totally wrong there, but I also don't think that that's really a good example of like Haiti, no one did anything because I mean, if we're looking at it in terms of like from like our like global north perspective, I mean, you're looking at like bourgeois states being able to do anything, which I mean, obviously it's not really in their interest to undo, you know, or like to look at bourgeois states as like citizens of the world is obviously going to have you with like a very pessimistic view of the world. And then similarly to think of it as like people didn't do enough because for most of us in like the global north, like the option is just to like donate to a like NGO, which is also not really a desirable option. So, I mean, I'm not saying that you're wrong there. I think that it's like a fair point to be.
I do have two other examples that are kind of different.
I just want to bring up with the education thing. I have a podcast, and with this podcast, the first episode's about alienation and education, and it also talks about the Prussian military style system.
Yeah,
so
I've read that John Taylor
out.
Gatto essay. I know what you're talking about.
Why, Sonia, that sounds like it would be available on iTunes and Google Play. What's it called?
Unfortunately, it's not, but it's called Left Ahead. It's called Left Ahead, and it's on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Left Ahead podcast.
I also have a Fire mixtape on SoundCloud. I just want that to be clear.
My other two examples were like, if anyone has lived in a house with a lot of roommates, if you want to throw a party and then everyone sets up the party and throws it and then everyone cleans afterwards. But when it comes to the day-to-day of doing the dishes, it's just less glamorous, and you end up with, maybe you make a chore list or something that there's an expectation that people are going to do certain things that I wouldn't necessarily call coercion, but it's still, I guess, maybe voluntary, but he seems to think like people will just do the unsavory tasks without, just anyone who feels like doing sewage work will just do it. I think that's a little utopian.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that that's like definitely a very fair criticism of it.
I mean,
that's where the automated utopia comes in, though.
There is a part of me.
Oh, go ahead.
Elon Musk, Grimes is going to change him.
Yeah, Grimes, who took anti-imperialist out of her bike.
Listen, Kill V Mame is still fire, but
okay, Grimes is still good at music, though. Yeah.
As much as we attacked Kropotkin's futurism, though, I do think it was sort of a lot of those arguments about that he was making, if anything, are more realistic today because automation and these technologies have advanced so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that there's. I strongly agree with Kropotkin's. One of his main points is the fact that a 40-hour work week is way too long.
Yes.
And I do think that if we did switch to this model of society, then we could get the work done, the dirty work done, a lot more easily and a lot more with a lot more grace, than the way it occurs under capitalism.
Yeah,
we have a lot more dignity around these jobs.
And I think there is something to be said for, tying it into what we spoke about earlier about how a lot of these jobs aren't unpleasant because they have to be, but just unpleasant because it's not profitable or prudent financially to make them pleasant. And I think like sewer maintenance is probably the most unpleasant job that a person can do. But if it were like hygienic, I can tell you, I personally would love to do that because I love being underground. Like I always
the slime.
In my fantasies, I want to be like underground. To me, like that is, I would rather live in an underground tunnel than like be able to fly. Like that's
when
just
I get a hotel room that has no windows, they always apologize, and I'm like,
another piece falls into place.
the I forgot what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
Pressure's on. Okay,
someone else make a dumb Always Sunny in Philadelphia reference. I apologize for derailing this that way.
What's it called? I had something to say. Well, yeah, if everyone had to be involved in taking part in fixing the sewage system, it would be done overnight. We would figure out how to either automate it or make it as clean as possible, because otherwise no one.
Well, you remind me what I was going to say. Well, you have to poop. You have
the
to
hell
poop.
I do.
Everyone poops. Everybody poops.
Fuck and you. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do.
That is bourgeois propaganda.
That was very authoritarian of me. I apologize. I take it back. You may poop.
Thank you.
That was even more authoritarian though. It was like I allow you to poop.
I bid thee poop.
Tell someone to do something that they were already going to do, and bam, you're already telling them what to do.
But something that the more modern anarchism that I actually know a lot less about, because again, I didn't have my teenage rebellious anarchist phase, but something about the more modern school of anarchism where it's a lot more kind of direct action focused, I think it dovetails really nicely with the old school Kropotkin anarchism, because if we're going to have these kinds of societies, they're not going to be like America and Russia and China. Those countries are like way too big, and the only way that those kinds of states can exist is if we have these authoritarian regimes in place. If we're going to have flat hierarchies and open democracy, everything's going to have to become a lot more local, and things are going to be like, it's not going to be like, who is going to be responsible for cleaning the toilets across America? It's going to be like in your neighborhood. It's like, where are we going to put the trash in our neighborhood? Yeah. Who's going to, who's going to be responsible for the trash this Thursday? Is it going to be you, Jessica? Is it going to be you, Fred? Like, it's going to be very, you're going to have faces to connect with everything.
In your view,
see the guy who likes being underground. He's a weirdo. And
let the mole man deal with the shit.
Well, we'll see who's laughing when I finally kill the Fantastic Four. So, American, in your view, the entire community should be organized like Radical Reviewer's shitty apartment with a bunch of roommates?
I guess what I would say is, as anarchists, what we should be doing is, and this is not my idea originally or anything, but doing the work, just like, because there are anarchists that famously go out and they'll just like fix potholes, and
they're called
anarchists that go out. Exactly. Or Pornhub, I think, was like plowing snow for a while, right?
They were plowing.
And Pizza Hut also went
like
to fill a bunch of potholes, which is I feel like that's
capitalism is the solution. I was wrong. We just need to let
dystopia shit,
corporations deal with them.
Yeah, exactly. No, all the corporations are going to deal with everything for ad revenue, and that's going to solve everything.
But I genuinely see ANCAPs online saying that Domino's will solve the question in anarcho-capitalism
for sure.
of the roads.
But the answer to that, as anarchists, is that we go into the communities and we show people that the state is not necessary to kind of save your life, and that humans existed for thousands of years without a state and without corporations and without jobs and without money. We're social creatures, I think, and I think capitalism has alienated us to the point. Like, because I live in Vietnam, and the people here are so much more connected to each other, and it's not because they're communists. It's just they have, I guess, a older model for their society. I guess you'd say.
I'm sorry to interrupt, American. Where do you live?
Yeah, I live in Hanoi, Vietnam.
No, I'm just being a jerk.
I'm
sorry about that.
Oh, did I drop that too many times?
American, where do you live?
I haven't had anything to say for a while.
Yeah, I was wondering why you were starting every sentence with "as someone who lives in Vietnam."
Well, it's it gives me the what do you call it? Street cred. I have street cred.
This is another thing that I in the book that I wanted to point out that I think is a little outdated, is this model of a revolution where a bunch of people get guns and take over the government. It strikes me as like,
Kropotkin says that that's not necessary and won't happen. He says that basically the soldiers, like if the movement is big enough and enough people buy into it, we'll just dismiss the senators and presidents and everybody from their jobs. Will say, you don't have to do your job anymore. You can go home. And the soldiers will just kind of join in. Kropotkin, if anything, in my opinion, was maybe too optimistic about the lack of a need for revolution, because he seemed to think that if enough people buy into this idea, we would all just peacefully just agree that we won't have a state anymore. And I actually, if anything, I'm more of a vanguardist than Kropotkin, because I don't see capitalists giving up their power as easily as he does. I would argue.
Oh, absolutely! Like, that's always been like my biggest. I have complicated feelings on gun stuff, but like that's always been what I see as like the weakest argument for guns is being like, oh, well, we can use it to overthrow the government. It's like, okay, well, you're fighting a huge military, especially when you're talking to people in the States, and then their response tends to be like, oh, well, the army will just stand down when they see all their fellow citizens. It's like, well, you don't need guns for that. You're just talking about like a coup or like a revolution, which is that's not necessarily relevant, really. But yeah, sorry.
One thing I'd like to mention is that like I'm currently working on some concepts like first off, how like to talk to liberals and get them on our side, and then on the leftist side, and then also on the topic of what to do about reform and revolution, because there's the book Reform or Revolution, but I think in my opinion there has to be a certain amount of reform before there can be any type of revolution, because you have to like dismantle, like, for example, how do we get rid of drones unless we like reform and like ban them?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean-
hashtag not all drones, but I will say just one quick thing. Kenneth Bank in the comments says, Thought Slime kind of looks like Jason Unruh. Kenneth, I'm going to find you, and you will regret your words and your deeds.
That is literally not at all true.
Such a needlessly cruel thing to say. About
Yeah,
You do
that
not
was-
have the mohawk. You do not have
What?
Kenneth is a class traitor, and I'm gonna say it. I'm not afraid.
who, me or him?
Him.
Oh yeah,
It's getting real.
I think like we definitely need like a large mass public support for any kind of big sweeping anarcho-communist change or something like that to happen. And I think something that really opened my eyes about that was the Occupy movement. That just talking to the general public, they were kind of sick of it. And when the police came and just started clubbing everyone and macing everyone, they were like, "Yeah, no, that's fine. I heard it was hurting small businesses anyway. That's what the news said. So I'm okay with it." And like, oof, that's a lot to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, there's this great paper I read. I can never find it. It talked about advocating in favor of militarized leftism, citing how in 2007, when all the companies were collapsing and not giving workers their benefits, in I believe Detroit, they workers occupied one of the factories. In France, they did the best thing ever, which was boss napping. They would kidnap CEOs. And that or in Bolivia, when the government tried to privatize water, they all the unions in the country united and marched on the capital, fought the military, and took the capital. And I tend to be very in favor, I guess, of that, but at the same time, I tend to be very critical of sort of individual acts of militarization or violence, because I think that what those things have as a common denominator is overwhelming public or sort of a consensus public support, where once you can get to that level of the public is behind us, we've sort of shifted the narrative, or we have sort of taken over that, we're popular enough, then militarization. But until that point, I think that it's so counterproductive.
And I think Kropotkin would actually really agree with you. But the one thing that Kropotkin didn't have to face, or he didn't face this time lock that we have with the climate and the automation and technology. We talk about drones. I mean, they now have these drones in China that have amazing face recognition. That might be propaganda, where they are actually just using spies to find people. But they're developing face recognition technology that apparently can recognize people even when they're wearing a mask, which that's not very good for the old black bloc folks. But I mean, the time lock is the one thing that I think makes me a little bit more of maybe an alarmist. I don't know, but I do feel like we have to move the needle, through education or through revolution or whatever. Humanity going down this path, it's not sustainable. I mean, we're killing the earth. We're putting ourselves in a position where the capitalists will be able to seize pretty terrifying authority through technology. So I'm not necessarily advocating for vanguard revolution, but I am asking the question, what are we going to do to make this happen quickly?
Yeah, Kropotkin also was in a time when that was way more within the Overton window. I mean, I think that that's such a big thing that we have to grapple with, is how far outside of the norms that feels like. I mean,
that segues nicely into something I was going to say, where I noticed in the chat, Tabletop Steve mentioned how we need to actually get ourselves in the media large enough to actually show who we are, in order to even get in the discussion, to even talk to people. And two books that talk about media and how it shapes our world.
He also said,
Reality in
Blank,
You,
which is great.
Manufacturing Consent.
I nominate Sonia as the group librarian.
Yeah, second.
This is amazing.
Listen, put some more Jameson in, and I'm in. We can do one of those terrible. This is my own library out in front of my house. That
up here in my garage in the Hollywood Hills.
It's like an artist, so it's nice.
Got this new Lamborghini.
But to the point about media, if you look at the digital media landscape, it's terrifying as well. And my job is digital marketing. And, so I play around with the keyword search tools and stuff every day. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried to do any kind of paid ads or experimented with that, but they do not make it friendly for leftists to get their message out in front of people, even if you're paying for ads. Like Facebook, for instance, does not have 90% of the keywords that we're using or the hashtags that we're using and that sort of thing. You can't even target them on Facebook. They're not even options. And capitalism is not going to give us the keys and the tools to dismantle it.
That's why I'm working on that thing about how to change our language to talk to liberals so that we can get in
That's
here.
a great idea.
Because something that the alt-right we can take from them is how to I want to say subvert, but we're being overt. We're just not using the language that we've been using, like bourgeoisie, proletariat. We need to start using different language in order to get to people and speak to people, because that's not the language that people know anymore. Public discourse is completely different than it was in the past.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
you folks haven't been seeing the anarcho-communism ad at the beginning of the YouTube videos you watch?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that and this is another sort of radicalizing force for me was when Trump got elected, because something that's I was joking about earlier, liberalism is so useless because in order to exist within the current system, you have to be able to connect whatever you're doing to capital. And if what you're doing is inherently opposed to that, you're going to have a really hard time. And I mean, what that sort of has allowed is that liberals have to sort of maintain this very status quo. I'm very obsessed with Jordan Peterson. I'm pretty sure I've watched more of his videos than most of his supporters. But in that, I know it's horrible.
I just want to, before you say anything, I just want to say that you're taking him out of context, and he didn't say that. Please go on.
This is actually nice to him. In that BBC interview, there's a part where he was saying how she was the gap between men and women CEOs, and he sort of did that Fight Club thing of we were promised to all be CEOs, but most of us aren't. And it's that's the thing, is that the alt-right is able to address the problems in capitalism that liberals can't, and there is, I think, such a hunger for that. This is the most horseshoe theory thing I'll ever say, but fascism and communism both come out of the same thing, which is the failure of capitalism. And so it's very easy to see fascists making critiques of consumerism or capitalism. Their solution is much, much, much more nightmarish, but they're able to make these critiques in a way that we aren't, or that we're playing catch up in.
That is really important. Oh,
yeah,
you got us all thinking.
The built-in advantage they kind of have is they don't have to tell the truth.
Yes, that's also true.
They're gonna make stuff up, and if it suits their agenda, they can just say it. And we really can't.
The majority, and they control the power structure.
Exactly.
Essentially, demographically at least. But Kropotkin was pre-fascist, and I think that's important to note. He was essentially pre-fascist, and I would say that fascism isn't really a response to capitalism's failure. In my opinion, capitalism is a response to communism, and it's a liberals use fascists throughout history. Fascists are their guard dogs, So when the privileged capitalists become threatened.
Fascism. I have an essay about how the failures of past socialist revolutions lead to fascism, coming out soon.
Excellent. That sounds right up my alley.
I mean, yeah, because that's such a thing with thoughts on had disagreements about my stance on deplatforming. I think he's also right about a lot of things I hadn't thought of. But something that I think I'll see people talk about anti-hate speech laws, in Germany, where leftist publication got shut down for calling cops pigs, which was hate speech. I mean, I think that in the way that liberals will use fascists as these guard dogs, where they'll people Trudeau, Macron, Merkel, they will happily censor the Nazis. They'll go after the Nazis. But do you have who do you think they have more vested interests in common with, the alt-right or the radical left?
Okay.
And they're absolutely going to come for the communists after that.
That's true. However, communism and anarchism don't need to be legitimized in the way that fascism does. Fascism thrives when it's looked at as legitimate. And anarchism and communism have always been semi-criminalized anyway.
Mm-hmm.
In my own country, in our country, Canada, maybe you heard of it.
Where do you live?
This is the thing that Tristan brought up in a live stream I did with him a couple of weeks ago. Tristan from Step Back History.
Yeah.
He talked about how in Canada we have hate speech laws that that are federally ratified, but provincially different provinces can opt out, and only one has, and that's Quebec. And subsequently, Quebec has an enormous concentration of neo-Nazis and is the only province in Canada with an active KKK sect.
That's fair.
And this is kind of a tangent, but the other thing is that fascists, I think, understand communication a lot better than we sometimes give them credit for.
Oh, yeah.
And part of that is somebody in the comments was talking about decentralized platforms, and I did plug Mastodon at the beginning of this show. And I will say that one thing leftists need to be doing is advocating for decentralized, unmonetized communication platforms. And, things like the Fediverse, those are places where you can really get some punch and get your message across, because first of all, you're not competing with what we call indirect competition, which would be just like there's so much more advertising and clutter on things like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. On services like Mastodon, it's a purely social space, and there's a lot less moderation, by the powers that be. And if you don't like the way it's working, you can fork off and make your own branch and make the rules yourself. So I think all leftists should be, the way I like to say it is that when we're engaging with Twitter or Facebook, we're in enemy territory, and we need to be very thoughtful and intentional about how we're using those platforms. It's not a place where we should be just comfortable to relax and hang out. Those are places where we're not safe. We're being monitored, we're being manipulated, we're constantly having behavior modification techniques used against us. So that's why I'm saying we should be trying to have an exodus to these federated platforms where we can have a more open and direct discussion about these issues. There's
a journalist named Siobhan O'Leary who did a great thread on this on Twitter, of all places. But she says that the radical left should always behave as though it's being surveilled, not because there's like a man at a computer reading all of our tweets. There might be, but even if there's not, if you end up getting arrested, they can just go through your history and find some pretense to manufacture incriminating details about you.
That's because the capitalist state has this sort of ideological bias in it. The example I always hear is like compare the FBI's treatment of the KKK to their treatment of the Black Panthers. But I think it's Michael Parenti has a lecture. I want to say it's Lazy Law and Social Control is maybe the lecture on YouTube that just talks about various FBI and police interactions with right-wing protesters versus left-wing protesters. Left-wing people getting trumped up charges and jailed for, they really exaggerate what it was the person was doing, and then the right wing just kind of gets away with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm from the South in America. South Carolina is my home state, and
where are you from?
Oh my gosh, I'm just contextualizing. I'm not bragging about coming from South Carolina. Don't worry about that. But the number of police officers who are in the KKK there, and this is from my lived experience. I have relatives that are in the KKK. I have a lot of direct experience with those kinds of groups, and the police are in cahoots in a lot of places. I'm sorry. How could a leftist have a chance?
Are you telling me, American, that some of those who work forces are the same that burn crosses?
Yes.
No comment.
Yeah. Mic drop. No, I mean that doesn't make any sense because the police are socialized and they are communist, not
they've got a union.
Yeah, it is true that
they lead the DSA.
Yeah. As I've been watching way too much, like if anyone was watching this hasn't seen my channel, which is probably most of you, I just like debunk / roast like right-wing people, and it's hurting my mental health for sure. I've watched way too much Ben Shapiro and Scott Adams, but yeah.
Scott Adams.
Oh, but if I am putting out a video pretty soon talking about Scott Adams and Kanye West, which yeah, hopefully will be good or will be the worst video I've ever made. I've made 2, so this will.
You can't. There's no middle ground.
Yeah.
No gray area there.
I agree with you, Thought Slime, that like,
sorry,
train of thought.
No, I will say that we should probably wrap up. So if anybody has any last thoughts on the Conquest of Bread.
It's a good book.
Yeah,
Read
it was
that
good.
book.
Something that like I thought, I mean, I only read the first half, so I'm sorry, but something I thought was really cool and sort of interesting was when he was talking about individualism, and I think like the second or third chapter where he's talking about how individuals sort of like the individualist ideal is to be like, oh, I'll just buy all this freedom, and sort of addressing how that's very misplaced and very on the right track but wrong. Like this is something like I really liked about this book, is that I tend more towards libertarian than like authoritarian, for using the like bullshit political compass stuff, but yeah, like it was a good sort of way of like synthesizing the, oh, I can still hate the government and also think that property is theft it was in a cool way. But yeah.
I completely agree. I mean, I came from a right-wing libertarian background, so I totally echo the whole idea of wanting to have personal liberty. I just think we shouldn't sacrifice the liberty we get from not having a state and just turn around and submit to a capitalist overlord. So
yeah, like the way that he sort of makes it very I think it's in the chapter on food where he sort of goes through, okay, if we got rid of property but kept the state and kept private, or if we got rid of estates but kept like private ownership of companies and of the state, then like everything would, like, this is how it would fall apart. If we went through like each example, I really it sort of like synthesized that in a really cool holistic way of yeah, sort of like looking at how they're all very connected. I got radicalized in a very weird, random, odd places. One of them was The Grapes of Wrath, if anyone's read that.
Oh, that's such a good, that's
so
a
good.
Really great
I'm guessing you know the part I'm talking about when it's the banker coming to repo the guy's the farmer's house. There's this like amazing half the chapters are this story about this family that it's okay, I don't really care about that much, and then half of it are these like beautiful like prosaic chapters about like describing capitalism. And one of them, it's describing the like a repo guy coming to like repossess this farmer's house, and the guy's like, no, I'm gonna shoot you. And the guy's like, okay, my boss is gonna hire another me next week. And he's like, well, shoot him. It's like his boss, and it goes all the way up until it's like the bank. It's like, well, shoot the head of the bank. It's like, the bank doesn't have a head. The bank will hire a new thing. And like looking at it in a structural way, and especially tying the state into that, I really liked and thought was a really it synthesized a lot of things that I'd had a hard time articulating before this.
That's weird, because in chapter 6 he says just kidding, and all of that was he didn't believe any of it. But okay.
Speaking of towards the end of the book,
original Banksy.
He talks a lot about like trying to rely as little as possible on trade and try and be like as self-sustaining as possible. And I think it's towards the front end where he talks about, the farmers will give us the food and we'll give them, whatever is their need. But in a modern context, what does that exactly look like when, super complex webs of global trade is essentially how our modern society functions? And, give the farmers, what am I supposed to go out to the farmland with an armful of iPads or
and
what?
where am I going to get like cobalt to make those iPads?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like that kind of thing really dates the text.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyone else?
Red Book pretty good.
Okay. Agreed. This is the end. Now we're going to recommend a book for the next group.
I'd like to plug this book. It's a sort of more modern version of the Bread book.
Okay.
Paracon.
Which one?
Life After Capitalism.
Okay.
I
got
guess maybe
2
2010. But it's more about how you would essentially do the Bread book, but with the modern infrastructure we have.
All right. I like that.
I got 2 recommendations. One is Capitalist Realism. For one, it's short.
I read it like a month ago. I don't want to read it again.
Yeah.
Then the other is Bullshit
I'm halfway
Jobs
through
by
that, which
David
means I might
Graeber.
be able to finish it for next month.
The other is Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber.
Okay. American? You there, bud? I think he might have frozen. Oh, he's back.
I got dropped.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah.
No worries. Do you have a book to recommend for the next group?
I do have a book to recommend. Since I live in Vietnam, I chose a Vietnamese book.
Oh, cool.
It's called People's War, People's Army by Va Nguyen Giáp. And it's much different from the Conquest of Bread. That's kind of why I chose it. Plus the fact that I love talking about how I live in Vietnam. But yeah, it's an insurrection manual, basically. It's kind of the exact opposite of the Bread book. But the reason I'm recommending it is because, first of all, I'm a big fan of leftist unity. And, I just wanted to give a shout out to my Marxist-Leninist comrades, even though I'm not a Marxist-Leninist myself. But I think that you can get ideas from any source, whether you agree with them 100% or not. But this is just a great book about the perspective of, what does an armed revolution require? This is one of the greatest military leaders in history who wrote this. And there's also a lot of, philosophical stuff in there as well. So great book. Check it out. Fun read.
And I'm going to repeat my recommendation from last week, and I'm going to do that until we get to read it. It's called Splatter Capital. And Splatter Capital.
Splatter Capital.
It's a Marxist analysis of horror movies as an expression of capitalist ennui.
That's amazing.
That sounds awesome. Yeah.
All right. So those are some good choices. Anybody have anything to say?
Or am I disqualified? Or I do have a couple.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you already went.
Oh no, I did not. Yeah. I was gonna say we read the postcard by Derrida, but I don't have any. I'm joking. It's a terrible thing to do.
I think I know what you're gonna recommend, though.
Since Thoughts on and I are both based out of Ontario and just got Doug Ford elected, I've just started cracking open Naomi Campbell's No Is Not Enough, which I'm enjoying. Naomi Campbell's dope, and
she's actually doing a book signing in Toronto next week. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
So since we talked about how to strategize and sort of tactics, I also recommend How Nonviolence Protects the State. Just a sort of blow-by-blow critique of the nonviolence protest.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, some solid suggestions. I'm going to put them on a straw poll and let people vote on what the
cool
next book will be.
Yeah. Those both sound really. Sorry, no offense, American. Sonia and Thoughts on both of those sound really cool. I am very critical of violent protests. That sounds interesting, and also I really like Marxist analysis of literature. So. Splatter Capital sounds cool.
If you keep being against...
This isn't all about me. God damn it. I'm sorry.
If you keep being against violent protests, I'm going to kick your ass.
Okay.
Ooh. Putting his money where his mouth is.
All right. This has been good. Anybody want to plug anything before we go?
I'm plugging my YouTube channel, youtube.com/anactualjoke, twitter.com/anactualjoke, soundcloud.com/leftahead podcast. Go check those out.
I reviewed both these books on my channel, and I'm going to review the Bread book at some point. But I reviewed both these already.
Okay.
Nice. I've got my channel. It's not good yet, but it might be.
It's good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple videos out. I'm going to be putting out my next one in the next couple weeks. Yeah, it's been a lot of going through everything Scott Adams ever did. So if you want to learn about that, but don't want to have to go through so many podcasts and so many InfoWars interviews, I'm your guy.
And I have a fresh, hot breadbook derived puppet show on my YouTube channel, which is Non-Compete. And you can find everything that I do at non-compete.com. I actually made a Kropotkin robot named Kropotkin. And you can check him out at Non-Compete on YouTube.
It was a good
and
video.
internet.
Go check out American at Non-Compete.
Thank you.
Actually, Non-Compete, I really like your stuff because I feel like, someone like Counterpoints you could easily show to friends and family, but I feel like your stuff could really work. Like if a teacher wanted their, AP social studies class to watch your videos, it would really work in it's more accessible to the general public. I feel like.
I did.
So, loving your stuff is what
I was a child for several years, so I have a lot of experience with children and teaching.
In South Carolina.
In South, 49th in education.
All
Used to be
right.
50th.
Well, it's been a pleasure, everyone.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I'm out of booze, but cheers.
Yeah, so
I don't know why I thought I'd get a drop out of that.